Good evening, and welcome to the President's Lecture Series on Health. My name is Penelope Glenn, and I'm the coordinator for the series, and I will be your moderator this evening. I want to welcome all of you to this particular panel. Some of you are new to the President's Lecture Series panels, and some of you are here like clockwork, but all of you are welcome to any of these panels, and it's truly a pleasure to have you here this evening. The panel this evening should prove to be very informative as well as exciting and engaging, and I hope you enjoy it. The title of the panel is The Digital Double-Edged Sword: Social Media's Impact on Mental Health. And I'd like to say, who knew where we would be today in regards to social media? In fact, the literature has documented what we all really know, that social media has transformed how we connect, how we communicate, and how we assimilate information. And it is used worldwide. Most of us are clearly aware of its benefits because we use it. But how many of us have put blinders on when it comes to its negative effects on health, in particular, mental health? It does have consequences, such as behavioral addictions. So tonight we'll hear about its benefits, but you will need to remove your blinders and hear about some of its negative aspects. And I'm confident that our panelists will open your eyes. So, our first speaker this evening is Dr. Weigel. And Dr. Weigel is a distinguished fellow of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. He's board certified in those areas, and he serves as Associate Director, Medical Director at Na-Chung Hospital. He's also Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. For decades, he has taught, he has studied, and he has written regarding the effects of screen media habits on the mental health of youth. Dr. Weigel also serves on the Institute of Digital Media and Child Development's National Scientific Advisory Board. Dr. Weigel graduated magna cum laude from Dickinson College with a Bachelor of Science in Biology. Then he did his medical training at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey and postgraduate training at Harvard Medical School. At this point, I would typically introduce you personally and turn it over to Dr. Weigel, but because of a glitch in the recording, I will present his first 4 slides, and then I will turn it over to him. And if you'll bear with me 1 minute, I will share my screen and put up the slides. So Dr. Weigel is going to give an overview, a general overview of the double-edged sword of social media. He does expresses no conflicts of interest in the topic tonight. The agenda for social media and mental health. He'll first present teen habits, then give an overview of the mental health crisis, and then the benefits and harms of social media, and then sort of a discussion of both. So what is social media? Social media are online platforms or apps that facilitate, as I mentioned earlier, communication, community building, content sharing, and connecting people globally. But the definition is vague. For example, is YouTube, given these criteria, is YouTube a social media platform? And what about Roblox, which is a game that teens play among each other online, and it really does meet all these things, but does it typically qualify as social media? So the definition is vague. So what's the thought process that went into building social media? And Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, said, the thought process that went into building social media was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And they came up with a persuasive design that did that. It had to increase motivation and decrease friction. And how did they do it? They did it by making it accessible, affordable, built on algorithms, allowing for continuous scrolling, allowing likes, and using colors, and using notifications. That's the persuasive design. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Weigel.
They are free because, of course, we are the product that are being sold to advertisers, and of course, the superpower of social media is the algorithm that finds posts that are of interest to you. And other tricks that are used, the continuous scroll, so there's no natural stopping point, the likes that engages people in competition, even the colors that are used, the red notifications that you want to make go away, for example, and of course, even when you put social media down, notifications are there to pull you back in, and these are some of the elements of persuasive design, and I've been studying media habits in kids for about 20 years, and during that time, the average amount of time that young people are spending on entertainment screen media has roughly doubled. So that CDC data says 11 to 14-year-olds average about 9 hours a day. Now, that does not include schoolwork or anything like that. This is just entertainment. And if you think about it, over the course of a year, that's more time than kids are spending in any other conscious activity. About twice the amount of time they're spending in school. So screen media has really transformed the experience of adolescence, and social media has a lot to do with that. The biggest period of growth was between 2010 and 2019, and that was because of the trifecta of the launch of social media, which came out a couple years earlier, but started to enjoy popularity with teens during that time. High-speed internet became readily available, and smartphones, so that young people could now, they didn't have to be in front of a computer to engage in social media or entertainment screen media, video games. They could carry it with them onto the bus, into the bathroom, into class, into bed, and this really made a significant increase in the amount of time that young people had to engage with screen media. Now, when we look at popular apps for young people, again, whether you call YouTube social media or not, TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat. So the visual or video-based social media, not so much the text-based X or Facebook that teens' parents are using. So with the rise of screen media in general and social media in particular in the lives of young people, we've seen this concerning increase in problems with mental health. So this is depression rates among girls and boys, which had been pretty stable for some time and have more than doubled since 2010. And we saw similar increases in anxiety, and interestingly, we're not seeing it among people my age. We're not seeing it among adults. It's really just among kids that we're seeing some of these increases. The same is true also of depression. We're also seeing these terrible increases in self-harm. This is the percentage, or this is young girls presenting in the emergency room for self-harm, and among the youngest kids, quadrupled during this time, and increased among older girls as well. And we've also seen concerning increases in teen suicide, which had actually been trending down for many years, but again, since around this time, has increased. And this, of course, led the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, my organization, and the American Academy of Pediatrics to jointly declare a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health in 2021. And the Surgeon General specifically issued an advisory on social media because of the concerning relationship with the rise of social media and the rise of mental health problems among young people. Now, the truth is, we don't really know with any certainty what caused this rise in teen mental health problems. But I do think that there are some myths or some ideas that have been pretty much proven to be false. One is that the pandemic caused the adolescent mental health crisis. Now we saw all these charts here. That was the pandemic didn't even change the trajectory of these. They were well on the rise before 2020. Homework, the idea that kids have too much homework these days. Studies show that they're not doing any more homework than they were 20 years ago on average. Stigma, the idea that kids aren't really less mentally healthy, they're just more willing to talk about their mental health issues. This would make sense except for the increase, the objective data, like increases in suicide, for example. It just doesn't line up. Also, school shootings doesn't seem to line up with the prevalence of school shootings. Concerns about the environment is another potential or suggested cause of the mental health crisis. But generational data shows that teen concerns about the environment really peaked in the 90s. And another one is the economy, the idea that the bad economy is what causes the mental health crisis. But that doesn't really line up either. Here we have unemployment, and here we have rates of teen depression. You see, they really don't line up at all. Now, what does really line up very closely with rates of depression in teenagers and girls in particular, is time spent on the internet, which really, again, took off, not to belabor the point, but around 2010 and really until 2020. And that's because of the proliferation of smartphones and social media among teenagers. So it does really parallel this very closely. Now, there are dozens of studies that look at the relationship between social media habits or screen media habits and social media habits and mental health. And in general, the more time you spend on social media, the worse your mental health. But and you're more likely to have depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Of course, this is a correlation, and it's not a very strong association. Okay, it's a mild to moderate association, so less than the effect of a antidepressant on depression, for example. Significant, but doesn't seem to explain everything. So it does seem that there's reason to believe that there's really both benefits and harms to mental health. So I do think it's really important to talk about the amazing benefits of screen media in the lives of young people for their health, is that it has displaced the high risk behaviors that kept my parents up at night when I was a teenager in the 80s and 90s. Sex, drugs, violence, car crashes. Kids are safer than ever, with the exception of suicide, safer than they've ever been. So this is rates of teen pregnancy, and we can see that has been steadily in decline, mirroring or the opposite of the increase in screen media. So they might be sending each other pictures online, but less and less are teens getting pregnant. This is rates of auto accidents, and we've seen since the year 2000, it's less than half of what it was. This is teens dying in auto accidents. And the biggest reason for this, of course, is that teens aren't in cars as much. They're delaying getting their license. They don't need to get in cars to get together. They can do it online, and therefore they're safer than they ever been before. This is hospitalization for accidental injury among males and females, and we can see that among adults it really hasn't changed, actually increased for people my age. But in kids and young adults, we've seen these remarkable decreases during this time. So among boys, less than half of what it was around the year 2000, and same trend among girls. And my take on this is that boys aren't out doing the dumb stuff that gets them injured or taking physical risks like they used to, which certainly has its benefits, but it seems to be keeping them out of the hospital for accidental injury. We've also seen, we don't talk about this much, but remarkable decreases in substance use, drug and alcohol use among adolescents that have, again, been displaced by their time spent online. So this is the percentage of eighth graders who drank in the last month, and around the year 2001, it was almost half. Now, only a small fraction. This is 12th graders, the same thing. Opioid use has plummeted since the year 2000. Now, you might be asking, aren't I hearing that the opioid deaths are actually increasing? And the truth is they are, because the opioids are so much more potent and dangerous these days than they were. But the percentage of teens that are using them has drastically decreased since the year 2000. Same as with cocaine use. But I don't, and there also was evidence of decrease of significant decreases in nicotine use, which kind of plateaued with the vaping craze, and decreases in cannabis use as well. So they might be getting addicted to their devices or their video games, but less and less to drugs and alcohol. We're also seeing remarkable decreases in violent crime committed by youth. They may be shooting each other on Fortnite or CSGO, but less and less in the real world. And of course, we know that social media plays a really positive role in the social lives of a lot of young people who can extend their friendships beyond the school if they can't get together in person. And can make new friends that they would not have been exposed to otherwise. And this is especially important for minority youth who can find peers that share their identity that they might not have at school. And this might be different types of minority: LGBT youth, ethnic minority, religious minority, even political minority kids can find like-minded peers online that they couldn't. And conversely, kids can find diverse peers that they wouldn't at their school. They can make friendships with kids around the world from different cultures. And studies do show that there's one group of teenagers that the more time they spend on social media, the better their self-esteem, and the less likely they are to have depression and anxiety. And this is kids who have high social support at school. Okay, so you might say popular kids at school are also tend to get more positive feedback on social media and have a better self-esteem the more time they spend on social media. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about the harms, though: social deprivation, displacement of healthy habits, distraction, inappropriate content, and online predators, and focusing on kids and teens here. I just was talking about how wonderful social media is for social lives of young people. Why am I saying it causes social deprivation? Well, we've seen that socializing has really migrated from in-person to online, and this is the percentage of time that young people are getting together outside of school socially. And you can see it's really plummeted among teenagers and young adults, not so among older adults. Been largely replaced by time spent online on games and on social media. And socializing on social media is, there are some similarities, but it's also very different. One is the asynchronous nature of communication on social media, which really appeals to depressed and anxious kids. They don't have to be put on the spot. They can stop and think about how they want to respond or represent themselves on social media. But of course, they don't get that practice, with socializing in person. Lacking that face-to-face contact means kids don't get as much practice learning how to interpret nonverbals, for example. And studies show that socializing in person is protective for mental health in a way that socializing via social media is not. And even when kids are together, phones and social media have transformed the way that they interact. And if you've seen kids at a cafeteria, you know what I'm talking about. Kids are often, engaged with their phones and their social media rather than each other, and that's not always true. Sometimes the phones can actually bring them together. The sort of, hey, check out this video or something. So it isn't always the case, but very often it is a barrier rather than something that connects. And studies show that as Facebook originally, when it first came out, it rolled out to various colleges, starting from Harvard, and measures of mental health dropped at each of these colleges after Facebook was introduced. And the interesting thing about this data is it showed that it decreased even among kids who didn't use it. Okay, so my interpretation of that is it changed the social environment for everyone in a way that was negative. So we're seeing that even when kids are at school, they're much more likely to say they feel very lonely than they had in the past. We're seeing this around the world. And again, it really increased around the time of social media. And of course, the family environment is not immune. A majority of young kids surveyed said that their parents were often or very often distracted when they wanted to engage with them. And the number one cause that kids gave for parents being distracted was smartphones. And of course, this is bidirectional, and many parents are phubbed by kids who would rather or engage with their phone instead. But studies have found that just introducing a phone into the social equation, it does disrupt communication and family harmony. Families just get along more poorly when there are phones in the mix. Social media also displaces, along with other forms of screen media, it's displaced healthy habits that young people need to be engaged in. A variety of hobbies, chores, employment. Young people are doing less of these than they have in the past, and studies bear this out. And this is important because, like in-person social interactions, non-screen media activities are found to be protective against mental health in a way that screen media activities are not. And one example of this is reading for pleasure. So this is the 12th graders who read 6 books in the last year. When I was a kid, it was almost half, and now it's a small percentage. And of course, reading is an activity that has significant value. Physical measures of physical activity have declined in recent years, and we've seen a concomitant increase in obesity among youth that really has paralleled their time on screens. And perhaps the most important mediator between screen media habits and mental health is sleep. There are hundreds of studies that show the more time you spend on screens, the worse your sleep, especially if the screens are in your bedroom, especially if you're looking at it after dark, and especially if you're doing social media or video games in bed. And so we're seeing these concerning increases in sleep deprivation. Sleep is so important in ways that sometimes we don't appreciate. It is very important for academic achievement. How much of you remember of what I talk about today is going to have to do more with how you sleep tonight than perhaps anything else, because sleep is when we consolidate the memories from the day into long-term memories. So important for learning, but also adequate sleep is strongly protective against depression, anxiety, and suicide. And that may be the most significant mediator. Just wanted to talk a little bit about harmful content online. I believe that Dr. Vidal is going to talk a little bit more about this. Certainly, social media does put a lot of kids in contact with sexual predators. Now, when young people are sending sexual images online, it more often is to peers than to adults. But I've certainly seen in my practice a number of cases of young girls who have been victimized or approached by older men. Most often, it's girls who have little social support, little supervision at home, and oftentimes who have learning disabilities. Tend to be in my experience, those who are most likely to develop these toxic, ongoing relationships online with men and be exploited and abused in that way. Social media and screen media also contributes to constant distraction, of course. Some of you might be thinking about checking your social media right now. And young people do this when they're doing their schoolwork very often they are multitasking, or they're looking at they're stopping every few moments to check a text or something like that. And this habit, multitasking, predicts later onset of attention problems, school failure, depression, and anxiety. And younger girls may be the most susceptible to this. And studies show that just having a phone in the room actually impairs your cognitive performance. So again, just having like a phone on the table, um, uh, let me back up. So that if you do a cognitive test and your phone is out of the room, you'll do the best. If you do the same cognitive test but your phone is in your pocket, you'll do a little worse. If you do the same cognitive test with your phone on the table, even if you don't touch it, your performance is even worse. So this constant distraction that we all face to some degree, but kids in particular are susceptible to, has significant consequences for their academic success as well as their mental health. There's some activities there's some aspects of social media that are both beneficial and harmful, and one is online activism. A lot of young people really treasure social media as a place that they feel that they can express themselves and they can affiliate with people who are like-minded. And of course, it is, we really want kids to take an active interest in their world and try to make their world a better place. And traditionally, before social media, studies have shown that young people who are engaged in activism actually had better mental health than those who didn't. Interestingly, we've seen that pattern reverse, and that recent studies have shown that engagement in online activism is correlated with poorer mental health, and we don't understand exactly why this has changed. But some research out of Harvard indicates that many teenagers feel enormous pressure to to demonstrate that they support the right causes online. Now, what are the right causes? Well, of course, it's whatever their friends are into, which is mostly a liberal cause, especially in this part of the country, but in some areas is conservative causes. So oftentimes young people feel they have a pressure to sort of show that they are in support of these causes their friends do. And those who actually disagree often pay a really significant cost, those who disagree with the majority of their peer group. Social media psychoeducation is also something I want to talk about. Young people, like a lot of adults, tend to get their news on social media, and they tend to learn about health and mental health on social media. Now, of course, what they see is oftentimes not very reliable, and young people do know that, but they still use it because the same reasons that many adults do. It's convenient, it's entertaining, and it's what their peers are looking at. And I do think that online discussion of social media has taught kids a lot about mental health, and has really, in my opinion, been largely responsible for the stigma for seeking mental health services that has fallen over recent years. Um, but studies confirm that majority of the posts that concern mental health contain erroneous information. So one study found that 84% of TikTok mental health posts had misleading information, and 14% had pretty damaging information, like how to engage in cutting without your parents knowing, or how to engage in eating disordered behavior, that kind of thing. So what they're seeing is really a mixed bag. All right. So I do want to say that a lot of the data that I talked about was correlational, and I can't prove that these changes in social media engagement have the effect on mental health, and that's because the real kind of studies that would prove it, they don't exist, and they will never exist. We're talking about like randomized controlled trials where we raise some young people on social media and some off. So we're really forced to rely on the information we have. And it is my strong belief that nothing in the lives of young people has changed so much in the last 15 years as their relationship with screen media. I believe believe it has a lot to do with the changes with mental health, as I think I've made clear. And of course, it's important to recognize that not everyone is affected by social media the same. I didn't get into the ways that it affects different people in different ways, but variation is the rule rather than the exception. Social media hits us all differently. So in conclusion, screen media has come. Oh, I see that I'm out of time. You'll have my slides. I'm going to skip the conclusion so we have time for our other speakers and go past the references here. So at this point, I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Carol Vidal. Dr. Vidal, that's my timer, is a child and adolescent psychiatrist like myself. She is assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences in the Department of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Now, she's board certified in child and adolescent psychiatry and is a former president of the Maryland Psychiatric Society. And currently, she is chair of the Society's Council. Dr. Vidal is passionate about mental health prevention and access, especially among children and adolescents in underserved and under-resourced populations. She currently works in Bayview Expanded School-Based Mental Health Program, which is in Baltimore City schools, where she evaluates and treats kids and teens with behavioral and mood disorder. So she completed her MD and her PhD at the School of Medicine Universitat Autonoma de Barcelona, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Dr. Vidal, and got her Master's of Public Health from Drexel University in Philadelphia. She did her residency in general psychiatry and fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Carol Vidal.
All right. Well, thanks for the introduction, Paul, and for that great talk. What I'll be doing is there's some overlapping information, but not much, because I'll be focusing more on depression and suicide and what we know about it and the relationships and associations with digital media, and sharing some of the research that I've done. First of all, I just wanted to share my disclosures, and I'll talk about another disclosure later, but nothing really major. And I also wanted to put in context a little bit what depression and suicide in adolescents looks like, and how it has been changing over time. And also talk a little bit about some of the other reasons why we think that there's been an increase in depression, because I think it's important to also understand the other risk factors for depression in addition to digital media. It is good to know that, for example, in adolescence, there tends to be a change from more behavioral disorders to more presentations of anxiety and depression as the kids grow older. And sorry, hold on a second. And then that these have multiple risk factors, and that digital media actually can play a role in either enhancing or weakening the mental health efforts that we do. And just to also just so that it's clear, there's about 1 in 5% of people in the United States of adolescents between the ages of 12 to 17 that have had a major episode of the major depression episode during the past year. And that actually increased a lot, like Paul talked about, during the beginning of the 2000s and compared to after the introduction of smartphones. And what is also interesting is that among Black adolescents, there wasn't a big increase, but there was an increase of suicide rates that I will be talking about also. And then, as you can see in these graphs, you can also see that the increase in depression, though, didn't just start with the smartphone. There was already starting a little bit before that. With the turn of the century, there had been a decline in the 1990s, and then it started to increase. I think even if we found a lot of different reasons for why depression increased, that could be related to maybe like changes in the way we diagnose or decrease in stigma. One thing is clear, and is that suicide rates are increasing, and they're becoming more of a bigger problem in this century than they were, for example, in the 1980s, when suicide was the 5th cause of death among young people, whereas now between the ages of 10 and 34, suicide is the 2nd cause of death. So I think it's important to think about these causes for suicide. And obviously, we've talked about media and we'll talk about how suicide is talked about in social media. But the major cause for suicide is always like the major risk factor is depression, meaning that if you have depression, if you die by suicide, the largest risk factor would be depression. It doesn't mean that everyone who dies by suicide has had depression. Another one that's very important to talk about is substance use. And I know that rates have been decreasing, but we've also had the fentanyl epidemic, which was a big problem around the time of the pandemic, and the high potency products that are coming up with cannabis legalization. And obviously there's risk factors like trauma, violence exposure, the pandemic itself, which caused a worsening of mental health, and then income inequality and firearm access in the United States, and then this social isolation that Paul talked about. And among people that use substances, actually, suicide is the leading cause of death. 1 out of 5 people who die by suicide have alcohol in their system, and 1 out of 10 have some marijuana in their system. And these rates are similar in adolescents as in adults. And also, we have to think about the role of firearms in the United States, just because they're so lethal. If you, for example, cut yourself in order to die by suicide, your chances of dying are 7 out of 100, whereas if you use a firearm, you are very likely to die. 97% of the people who attempt suicide with a firearm died. So I just wanted to mention these things to keep them in mind when we talk about depression and suicide and digital media, because there's so many different factors that are also risk factors for that. And then I wanted to mention this study and just trying to like give another perspective as well from what Paul talked about, is that we tend to center our talk about social media on countries that we know, like the United States, because we're here. But when in this study, what they actually did is compare different countries, and they looked at these rates of suicide, and they actually found that it wasn't really across the globe that this was happening in the same way. There had been countries like Germany or Spain, for example, that did have an increase in suicides among adolescents around the recession of 2008, but then they recovered well, whereas in the United States and the UK and Australia, they did not recover, and we've had just worsening of these mental health outcomes. And then they looked at things that we often think about, like the economic recession and income inequality and social media use. And all these countries were using social media, but social media wasn't as strong of a predictor as income inequality was. And so, for example, in the United States and the UK and Australia, there was more income inequality. It was English-speaking countries with high GDP and more inequality, the ones that were having worse outcomes. So that's something also to think about. But there's no question, like Paul was saying, that, and Dr. Twingy has just written about it a lot, that there's been a change in behaviors over the last 2 decades, and that we used to, in my generation, we used to get in trouble for using drugs. I don't use drugs, but like, people used to get in trouble for using drugs or vandalizing or doing more externalizing behaviors, whereas now the problems are more things that people do when they're more isolated at home, like self-harming, not sleeping well, and having more depression. And this is what Dr. Twingy's theory of maybe this is caused by digital media. One thing I do want to say is that media has always been thought of a thing that could be alarming or could be a cause of different problems, from the radio to the TV to every single change of media has caused concern. It has a role in society, and media changes with technological changes. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate if the changes in behavior in the population are because of media or because of changes in technology. For example, I often think about how I used to go get my ice cream, and if it was I had to go to the grocery store, I would talk to the lady there, I would maybe meet someone that I knew from my neighborhood, and now I can just use an app, and it's not necessarily social media, but it's I order through Instacart. I don't have to talk to anyone, and that also creates isolation. So it's sometimes hard to know if it's the media itself or if it's just the changes in technology that have caused these changes in behavior as well. So just to keep that in mind as well. So what we did though is that we were concerned about social media and depression in adolescents. So in 2020, we reviewed all the literature that was available, sort of like with the intent to understand what the mechanisms, if there was an association, and not saying that it was a causality, like it was a cause, but a correlation, meaning that both things were sort of together. What would be those mechanisms by which someone with depression was using more social media, or was or how social media was affecting depression? And we looked at about 700 abstracts, and we ended up including in the review 48 that met inclusion criteria. And these basically were the areas that we thought, well, actually the literature was showing that was a concern or a question about, or a potential mechanism. Like Paul talked about, one was problematic internet use, which is another word for social media addiction. Basically, also there was a concern about whether you use more or less social media, if that was a problem. Some studies have showed that actually if you don't use any social media at all, that doesn't really give you better outcomes, or is not associated with better mental health. Social comparisons was another area where people would compare in different ways, and I'll talk about that briefly in a second. Cyberbullying, there was a lot of literature about that and the exposure to being bullied on social media. And then there was like characteristics of how people use social media. So some articles were saying that passive social media use, which is where you're just scrolling and looking at other people's updates, was actually worse than actively posting things yourself, or maybe looking for information was better than doing social comparisons. So how you use social media also mattered. There was less on parental involvement at the time, although things have changed in the last 5 years. There's some on social support, and what Paul already talked about. And then there was also a little bit, not much, on suicide contagion effect, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then finally, there was also some literature on online disclosure and prediction of mental health symptoms. And I think that's one of the positive uses of social media. There's actually a study that just was published by a team at Hopkins where I work, where they actually used therapist ability to access the posts of the patients with permission to see if there was any information that could help them during the therapy session, and to engage with the patient, but also to understand if they were at higher risk for negative mental health outcomes. In terms of that, like Paul has said, like we know the business model for the social media apps is to keep people engaged. So they have this intermittent reinforcement, and this which means basically what the slot machines do, which is you never know when you're going to get information that you're interested in, so you just stay hooked to the machine so that you eventually get what you like. And I think in adolescence, it's important to think also about how adolescents are so attuned to social connections, and social media has so many opportunities for that. Is it relevant? I think it is super relevant, like Paul said, because what's happening is that maybe if you're at risk for bad outcomes in a small group of people that are using social media, it's not that big of a deal. But right now, almost everyone is using social media, so the chances of bad outcomes are potentially worse. And then also about 54% of teens are saying that it would be hard for them to give up social media. This could mean two things. It could mean that they're addicted to social media, or it could also mean that they just don't see themselves not being on social media because they would be isolated from their friends. So it's kind of a hard question to read, but it is something that they're saying. And then finally, I just wanted to share this. I just wrote a book last year that was a small book with very a small print, but it basically talks about this, how social media, not so much about social media, but it talks about more social status and social comparisons, but a little bit in the context of social media and how social media really takes advantage of that characteristics of humans that our tendency to make social comparisons and to seek status. But essentially what about social comparisons, what the literature was saying, and it's said for many decades, is that if you tend to compare with people that are better than you may end up having more problems. Or the people that are depressed also tend to compare with people that are better than them. But you can also use social comparisons as a way to improve your mood by comparing with people who are worse off than you. And then there's the issue with social contagion, and the issue with social media is that because information spreads a lot farther and faster than with traditional media, it's harder for adults to both monitor and also be aware of what information the children are accessing. There's also a potential for like some activities becoming normalized. But there's also like positives about these fast pace of delivery of information. There's not so much literature and it's really recent, so we don't know that much about social contagion in social media specifically, but we do know about social contagion and suicide contagion from decades of research. And there's this book that from Goethe that you probably are all familiar with, that basically was the story about a young man who was not corresponded by the loved one, and then he ended up dying by suicide by sitting on a desk, opening his book, and using a firearm to kill himself. And then they saw in Europe that there were several suicides that were similar, that were basically copycat behaviors. So this became the Werther effect in 1974, when people were trying to describe similar phenomena like this that were happening at the time. And we've seen similar things happen with the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, if you're familiar with it. When after the show came up, there was an increase in suicide attempts and visits to the ED among adolescent girls. And the show basically portrayed an adolescent girl who ended up dying by suicide by cutting herself in a bathtub. And so that is one of the issues with social media, because traditionally, traditional media had actually come up with media guidelines on how to communicate when a suicide among a young person or a celebrity happened. But that is not necessarily happening with social media yet. So there's been this gap in time where people were exposed to suicide content without any monitoring of it. So these are some of the guidelines. Basically, you don't want to romanticize the victim or the suicide or give too many details. You want to make sure you have, a lifeline number. And this is not necessarily what's happening in social media. There was this talk about mental health has been happening for decades, not just more recently, but it has exploded with TikTok. That was popularized during the pandemic in 2020, and in Instagram and in TikTok, there's been issues with contagion, or at least exposure to content related it's probably not the best for adolescents, and without any monitoring of it or any restrictions. Like, for example, there's sites where you can learn how to lose weight. So if you're someone with an eating disorder or a tendency to have an eating disorder, that would not be helpful. Or there's been like basically fights being posted online in schools that then were repeated. So not all the behaviors that are on social media or the content is great, and there's not a lot of regulation of it. I think TikTok is trying to do a better job of it, but at the time when we looked at with a student and I, we looked at some of the videos that were related to suicide, and the problem that we were finding is that they didn't have a crisis number, but also that even though TikTok tried to censor the videos that contain the word suicide, because the content is posted by the kids themselves, they would come up with similar words to be able to continue to communicate the content, and the machine was not able to catch those words. Like, they would use words like unalive or suicide to still continue to share content on suicide. So let me see. The problem also is that, you used to be able to deliver information through the newspaper, and it was maybe more local. Now this content about mental health reaches billions of young people, right? So that's another issue with how many people see it and how much it's shared, and it's really a completely different speed of sharing information. But that, on the other side, can be used in a positive way, and we have actually some examples of public health interventions that have been done using social contagion in a good way. For example, there was this soap opera that was done in Rwanda during the conflict that had two characters in the show that were from opposite ethnicities that were at conflict at the time, but then they became a couple, and that was shown to be raising some more awareness, or at least some more willingness to be considering the other side, basically. And we have other examples for community violence reduction. And at the same time, also there's like been I feel like a sense that young people talk about mental health in a way that's less stigmatized. So that there's some positives about this social contagion. One example of a positive of contagion is the Papageno effect, which there was this rapper who had a song. The rapper's name is Logic, and he had a song with the title that was the suicide crisis line. And basically what they saw when they were studying it is that the more the song was listened to, or the more it was commented on, the more calls to the lifeline were, and it would seem like people were more suicidal, but actually what it just shows is that people are more aware that they can call a number. And also there were a reduction in suicides on the days with more social media talk about the song. Then finally, I just did want to mention the pandemic. While it has not been the cause of already a rise in the trend for depression and suicide, it really was kind of like a lifeline for a lot of people that were isolated at the time. And I think it just shows the other side of social media that that also Paul was talking about, how it can help with people that may be more socially isolated. And then both parents and kids just reported that they had increased a lot the use of social media during the pandemic. And then there's a lot of different things that you can do. We don't have a lot of research on what works and what doesn't for social media in like clinical settings yet. So people are starting to talk about it, but there's some initiatives, like for example, this Wait Until 8th campaign, where parents take a pledge so that their child doesn't buy a smartphone until they're in 8th grade, but they're also their parents, their friends don't have the phone either, so that it's sort of like a group thing, and you're not just the only one who doesn't have a phone, which I think is a good thing to start building healthy habits and postpone the dangers of getting too addicted to the smartphone as a child, which you're more vulnerable to. And then there's like things that parents can do, like trying to balance with other activities, have like more of a purposeful use of social media, try to access just age appropriate content, engage with the child, and then try to monitor the use, or have some screen controls. And I don't have a lot of time. There's multiple bills that are coming out at the federal level and also at the state level. I think that's a good thing, because there was a period there where there was like no control at all, and with everything, you don't want to get on any extreme. But I think the one thing that is being discussed a lot now across the country are these cell phone bans in schools, which I think are important, because cell phones are not only affecting depression and other mental health outcomes, but they're obviously distracting. So if they also affect educational outcomes, it's something to consider. So I think that this is just some people that I want to thank, and I have some references, but I'll just take questions later. And I want to introduce the next speaker now. Her name is Sandra Harris. She's the past state president of AARP in Massachusetts, and she's a passionate advocate for social connection and community well-being. She's the co-founder and co-leader of the Massachusetts Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness, host of Connect, a monthly television series in Massachusetts focused on addressing loneliness, social isolation, and healthy aging. A recognized leader in the field, Sandra Harris has received numerous accolades, including the 2024 AARP Ethel Percy Andrews Award for Community Service, the 2023 Friendship Works Catalyst Award, and was selected as 2021-2022 Gen to Gen Innovation Fellow. She's also a member of the Commit to Connect nationwide network of champions. She actively contributes to research and policy efforts related to aging and community well-being. She serves on the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center Community Advisory Board, is a stakeholder in the PCORI supporting practices in respecting elders study, and plays a pivotal role in advancing housing and support initiatives as a member of the St. Eileen's House Advisory Board and as director of the St. Aileen's House Foundation. And she earned her bachelor's degree in finance and accounting from the Southern University and her master's degree in interior design from George Washington University. Please welcome Sandra Harris.
Okay. Hello again. I'm certainly honored to be here talking about the impact of social media on older adults and to share facts, thoughts, and concerns. As the founder and co-leader of a coalition addressing loneliness and social isolation in Massachusetts, this topic is germane to promoting strategies that effectively keep older adults engaged, connected, safe, while simultaneously improving their mental, physical, and social health. So the question we constantly have to ask ourselves is social media the panacea we hope to keep older adults healthy, connected, engaged, and is it the best vehicle to stave off loneliness and social isolation, or is it strictly something else? Next slide, please. We there? The use of social media among older adults has grown significantly. The term silver surfers, referring to those 50 plus who consistently use the internet, has become a part of our mainstream vocabulary. According to a 2023 Pew study, in the US, 45% of US adults 65 plus reported using social media in 2021, compared to just 5% in 2020. This growing engagement highlights the increased integration of the digital platforms into the daily lives of older adults. Next slide, please. According to the same Pew Research study, the main reason why older adults use social media are, number one, staying connected with family and friends, especially grandchildren. I know I enjoy watching my grandkids who live in Nashville play football through FaceTime on Saturday mornings. And the next reason is accessing news and information, keeping up with current events as well as health updates, engaging in hobbies and interests as online groups and forums. And they use it a lot for health and wellness benefits with telehealth visits, joining support groups for chronic conditions, mental health, and fitness. It's obvious that more research is needed in this area. However, we have found a number of research studies that provide evidence of the positive impacts of social media use by older adults. Evidence suggests that it helps to reduce loneliness and social isolation by allowing older adults to maintain relationships and find online communities, resulting in improved mental health and decreased feelings of loneliness and social isolation. Engaging with content, readings, participating in discussions keeps the brain active. Playing online games and puzzles can improve memory and problem solving, all providing cognitive and mental stimulations. Online fitness programs and telehealth services support physical and mental health and encourage positive health benefits. And at the same time, using social media for news, tutorials, and online education, especially YouTube and Facebook, provide access to new information and lifelong learning. It also provides opportunities for volunteering that leads to meaning and purpose in life. At the same time, it allows older adults to participate in civic engagements, community activities where they can share their voices on social issues. Next slide, please. At the same time, while some social media offers opportunities for connections and engagements, it also brings a slew of problems, challenges, and words of caution. Studies shows that misinformation spreads faster among older adults. Older adults are more likely than younger individuals to engage with dubious news sources, according to a Psych Post organization study. Another study from a RAND panel study shows that older adults tend to trust social media information received directly from family and friends more than posts shared by public figures or national news medias. Older adults are also likely to be targeted by online scams. According to a report of the Federal Trade Commission, a record $12.5 billion was reported stolen through scams and fraud last year, and older adults were hit hard, with people 70 plus having the higher median lost. And because many seniors are unaware of how to adjust private settings, identity theft, phishing, and data breaches are major problems. Next slide, please. As with other age groups, viewing curated context from peers can lead to feelings of inadequacy or envy, especially when comparing lifestyles, achievements, and with others to evaluate their own worth. And we have heard earlier about same kinds of things happening with young adults, young people. Social media is highly linked to high levels of anxieties, and it may be older adults may also be more susceptible to extreme social media content due to the algorithm-driven filter bubbles that we all have know and heard so much about, that leads to echo chambers where only similar ideas are reinforced and where they may miss out on important news or differing perspective, causing deepening feelings of isolation and distrust. Next slide, please. It also leads to doom scrolling, that mindless scrolling through negative or distressing news that heightens anxiety levels and lead to chronic stress, causing many older adults to feel overwhelmed, especially when they have difficulties relaxing or staying focused. It leads to a sense of helplessness as individuals are bombarded with events beyond their control, resulting in deeper feelings of vulnerability and loneliness. And we're finding that older adults tend to kind of fall into these patterns and habits more than younger people, younger age groups. And research has consistently shown that excess screen time, especially before bedtime, and we've heard this earlier tonight, can affect sleep quality among age groups. A recent study published in the BMC Nursing suggested that smartphone addiction can contribute to feelings of loneliness and depression, which in turn worsens sleep quality in older adults. Next slide, please. It's also important to consider the impact of digital technology versus in-person engagement on mental health and well-being. A recent Yale study showed that in-person conversations activated the brain's social processing area more than Zoom interactions. Face-to-face interactions provided stronger neural responses, engaged more senses, provided stronger emotional connections and empathy, higher recognition load and brain stimulation, greater mental health benefits, all indicating deeper engagement. At the same time, Zoom conversations showed reduced brain synchronization and social cue processing, suggesting that digital interactions do not fully engage the brain's social network. These findings, in my opinion, highlight the importance of in-person communications because increased brain activity is essential for older adults to help them maintain their cognitive functions. So while virtual platforms like Zoom provide a valuable means for staying connected, they may not fully replicate the cognitive and social benefits of in-person interactions, especially for older adults. In-person interaction is crucial for well-being. Next slide, please. Another interesting study published by the scientific journal published by NAS investigated the effect of blocking mobile internet access and smartphones for 2 weeks. These researchers found that the 2-week block led to significant improvement in mental health, subjective well-being, and sustained attention among participants. Of the 467 participants, 91% of the participants showed improvement in at least one of these areas, with 71% reporting better mental health. Although the average age of the participants was 32, there is strong evidence that older adults have similar benefits from these reduced screen times. This study further suggested that these benefits are partly due to increased time spent in offline activities such as in-person socializing, exercising, and spending time in nature. Next slide, please. So as we talk to older adults, especially those who are presenting as having experiencing loneliness and social isolations, we offer them several tips on interventions. First, we really recommend that they protect their mental health by unfollowing the negative accounts of those that trigger negative accounts are those that trigger anxiety, that they practice mindfulness and limit their comparisons to others. And when they really, these issues persist, we strongly suggest that they seek professional support, especially if they are having chronic anxiety and depression. Just as with young people, we suggest that they manage screen time. They set their time limits for social media use, take regular breaks to avoid doom scrolling and fatigue, and that they stay socially engaged, using social media to build meaningful connections with family and friends, and by joining positive and supportive online communities. We really encourage them to verify the information, to fact-check news and posts before sharing, and avoid clicking suspicious links or responding to unsolicited messages. We encourage them to stay updated on technology, especially on security updates, and to seek help, especially from tech-savvy friends or loved ones. And we strongly suggest that they report and block abuse. So in conclusion, social media offers a number of valuable benefits to the mental health and well-being of older adults. However, there are risks. Older adults benefit most when using social media mindfully. We strongly suggest that they cannot afford to binge on the empty calories of social media connections, and encourage them to spend more time in person, more time being in nature, taking walks or doing exercises. The key here is balance. It's important that this balance is in personal connections as well as interactions and being safe. While we've explored the individual pros and cons of social media, next slide, please. There's a larger society issue that I think we cannot ignore. As our world moves forward with technology, older adults without access to devices, Wi-Fi, or the digital literacy to engage in our ever-evolving digital world are being left behind. This isn't just a personal challenge, it's a societal gap which widens inequality and deepens isolation. The real challenge isn't just about using smartphones or social media wisely, but ensuring that everyone, especially older adults, have the tools, the skills, and access to participate in our digital society. If we don't address this, we risk creating a society where connection is a privilege rather than a right. So I thank you, and our next and final speaker is Megan Hawk. Megan is a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and a full-time assistant professor at Regis College. She's currently the program director of the online psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, or the MHP program at Regis College, where she's also a student in the Doctor of Nursing practice program. Her DNP project focuses on mental health literacy of K-12 educators, and she enjoys sharing her passion for nursing education with others. Megan spent 8 years practicing at a local community mental health clinic where she provides medication management, psychiatric evaluations, brief counseling, and precepted PMHNP students. Megan has volunteered with the Red Cross of Northeastern Ohio by providing disaster mental health counseling. She completed her associate degree of nursing from Kent State University in 2007, her Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree from Kent State University in 2011, and her master's degree from the University of Cincinnati in 2013. She holds national certification as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner with American Nurses Credentialing Center and as a doctorate in nursing practice candidate at Regis College in May of this year. Please welcome Megan Hogg.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the introduction and to the moderator and the other panelists. I'm excited to be here sharing this information with you all. There's been a lot of really important information already, and I'm happy to add to it by addressing the role of social media companies in shaping users' mental health and also tackling some of the ethical concerns that arise with this topic. So I had to really think about how I wanted to approach this. So I ended up choosing 3 topics that I felt were mutually important for the consumer and important for the social media platform. So I landed on data privacy, algorithms and content moderation, and regulatory initiatives. And we're also going to discuss how the platforms can mitigate mental health symptoms within those content areas, then expand at the end for more discussion. So I'm a really big fan of just starting from square one. So we're starting out with, what is data anyway? What are we talking about when we talk about data privacy? So simply put, data is just your information, right? So data is just information. So think of it as any information that you are entering into your social media app. So let's see here. So what kind of data are we talking about protecting, and why does this matter? So I'm gonna kind of pick on TikTok for this portion because I dig into Facebook and Instagram later on in the presentation. So I did look up TikTok's privacy policy. Now they do collect information to provide, as they say, a useful and relevant experience for their community. But let's first think about what we have to put in anytime we download a new app. So the first thing that we always have to put in is our birthday, right? And we'll talk about why later. To register an account in the first place, TikTok needs your phone number. So it has that. To create your algorithm of relevant content just for you, TikTok needs to collect and analyze your likes, your shares, and your search history. Now, if you're in the creator fund, TikTok will request your physical address. And if you use TikTok Wallet or the virtual gifting feature, TikTok needs your payment information. So as I wrote those down one by one, I did kind of cringe a little bit, and not because I use all of those things, but I use enough apps that I know that I myself have put plenty of my own information in there, like surely many other people. Now, despite all that, TikTok describes some privacy suggestions on their page. So they suggest using a strong, unique password and 2-factor authentication. So these are 2 pretty sound ways of keeping any account secure. Additionally, TikTok shared a partnership with a company called HackerOne to continue to improve defenses in cybersecurity. In 2022, TikTok started hosting a server in the United States and now has around 2,000 US-based employees. There's a message of transparency on their website of how and through whom the third-party data are stored. So I did want to pull an example of a privacy breach, and I did find this one issued by Ireland against TikTok back in 2023. Following auditing, it was found that for about a 6-month period, the default content setting for users under the age of 16 was set to public, and the family pairing functionality was not working correctly. This violated privacy laws of the European Union, and TikTok was fined 345 million euros. In response, TikTok changed the default setting for users under the age of 16 to private in 2021. All right, so next we're going to talk about the algorithm. So we hear a lot about algorithms. We've talked about them a little bit tonight already. And it's important to take a moment to review what this term really means in the context of social media, as others have already stated. But the social media algorithm is a complex set of rules and calculations. It's used by most social media platforms nowadays to prioritize the content that you see in your feed. So simply put, it processes the data and recommends content to you, the user. Algorithms also feed us personalized advertisements. If anybody out there has never purchased anything from a Facebook ad, you're stronger than me. And the algorithm does not just create your own personalized feed, but it filters out content that it thinks that you don't want to see. And finally, the algorithm is going to be influenced by past user behavior, content relevance, and the popularity of the posts. So when used responsibly, social media can teach us some new hobbies. It can help us discover new music, new movies, games. We can make a new friend or two. There's lifestyle content, there's diet and health content. But from there, it can get a little bit dicey. Now, I myself liked, or at least I thought I liked lifestyle and fitness content. And I remember my own personal experience with TikTok several years ago. No, I did not dance. I just watched videos, but I used it mostly for, cute animal videos, silly humor. I would occasionally like a cute bedroom, and then more of those would start popping up. And I'd like a makeup artist, and then more of those would start popping up. And maybe I saw somebody's style that I really liked, so I followed her, and then more of that started popping up. And then I liked a few exercise videos, and all of a sudden, it was like before I knew it, I was transported to this world of beige, this clean girl. This is clean girl aesthetic right here. It's marked by minimalist makeup, perfectly maintained hair and eyebrows, a 9-step skincare routine. And being thin seems to be an unspoken requirement as well. As I scrolled and scrolled, the women on my feed seemed to get gradually thinner and thinner. The bedrooms got whiter and whiter. My feed had become this picture of perfection that did not represent me at all. And then once I came to this realization, I stopped using the app altogether. Now, this is just my singular experience, but I can tell you that repetitive content of this nature was not mentally healthy for me. So this is a good topic right here. We're going to stay here for a little while. So I'm going to introduce you to Frances Haugen. I saw a picture of her on somebody else's slides as well. So Frances here was previously a data analyst for Facebook. And she had grown frustrated by what she saw as the company's lack of openness about its platform's potential for harm and its unwillingness to address its flaws. She left Facebook with a trove of data, she analyzed it, and she told the world what she found. Well, specifically, she told the Wall Street Journal what she found. She's since testified before Congress to demonstrate that Facebook and Instagram had research verifying harms to children and teens, yet they did not act. Think about it. If Facebook or Instagram change their algorithms to be safer for kids, people will interact less. They will click on fewer ads, they will click on fewer posts, they'll make the company less money. Ms. Haugen suggests that Facebook encourages divisive content because it brings in more money. Now let's think about their profits in the context of what Frances found. This is a quote from one of the Wall Street Journal articles that covered this. 32% of teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse. The Wall Street Journal covered Frances Haugen's story and dug deeper into the issues at Facebook in a series of articles and podcasts called the Facebook Files. Some quotes extracted from the article include, quote, "Every time I feel good about myself, I go over to Instagram and then it all goes away. Another quote, "I'm pounded with it every time I go on Instagram," one user states about images of the ideal body type on the platform. Now we know that most teens spend several hours per day on social media, and focus groups have told us that like counts cause anxiety and negative feelings in teens. Instagram launched Project Daisy to see if eliminating the total number of likes would improve how users feel while using the app. Their own research showed that it didn't really make much of a difference, but Instagram launched it as a project anyways, without really providing context to parents as to whether or not the intervention would be helpful. Some regulatory initiatives. Section 230, the Communications Decency Act, provides immunity to online platforms from civil liability based on third-party content, as well as immunity for removal of content in certain circumstances. But a platform would be liable as a publisher for all of its third-party content if it exercised discretion to remove any third-party material. So in response, platforms really had two choices. They could try to moderate third-party content, but risk liability for content posted by third parties, or they could choose to not moderate at all and risk having their services overrun with obscene or unlawful content. More on regulatory initiatives. So the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, was enacted in 1998 and required parental consent for children 13 and older who were using certain social media platforms. The Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, was introduced in 2022 and has faced an increase in lobbying by social media companies since its introduction. The duty of care referenced in KOSA would require social media companies to prevent and mitigate certain harms that they know platforms and products are causing to young users as a result of their own design choices. Much of their recommendation algorithms and addictive product features would be included in that. And the specific covered harms include suicide, eating disorders, substance use disorders, and sexual exploitation. KOSA does not make online platforms liable for the content they host or choose to remove, and KOSA does not impose age verification requirements or require platforms to collect more data about its users. So we're really lacking on momentum on protecting specifically children on social media in that space. COPPA was first enacted in 1998. It was a step in the right direction. KOSA, not until 2022, but it did fail to advance through the House during the 2024 term. So now a lot of what we talked about is certainly concerning, but it does not mean that we shouldn't act. And Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, that was released about a year ago, is a perfect example of taking action in spite of a lack of legislative momentum. The Anxious Generation has inspired individuals to pick up new habits when it comes to smartphones. Elsewhere, entire school systems have gone phone-free. The idea behind this is that when kids go phone-free in school, engagement with one another increases and education is more effective. Even our new head of Health and Human Services has voiced some support for phone-free schools. And the cycle goes around. Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, endorses KOSA. And please notice that the original post is from the Eating Disorders Coalition. So think of how important this step would be for those who live with or love someone with or care for someone with an eating disorder. We know it's not a guarantee to prevent children and adolescents from accessing this potentially harmful or triggering content, but what if it prevented just one child or adolescent from viewing that final trigger? Thinking of that eating disorder content that the previous panelists were speaking about. One study identified triggering content, trouble regulating use, and pressure over social media metrics among social media users that were teens and children. And then I did want to share annual money spent on lobbying by Meta. Meta is the parent company of Facebook and Instagram. This graph is from opensecrets.org. Please note the increase in spending in 2024, the year that KOSA was meant to pass. It was about 24 million, I think. Yeah, 24 million. All right, So we've talked about the good, the bad, the ugly, with the strongest emphasis kind of being on the bad and the ugly. So where do we go from here, and how can it be a more beneficial space? And clearly, you know, in looking at my piece here, it's to me easy to say that they can do better, but in all seriousness, I was curious, so I asked my AI companion, it's like, how can social media companies do better? And the top answer was stricter content moderation, including banning harmful content and banning harmful communities. That this can help foster a safer and more inclusive environment. Now we have to remember that these are private companies, so they can enact it or enforce those rules if they would choose to. But really, what else can they do, or what else could they be doing? Just improving the moderation process. Invest in better training, better resources for content moderators. Consider using AI to assist with identifying and removing harmful content. It's likely that large social media platforms have the finances to do this. Just as an aside, because I have the time for it, I once reported on Facebook an image of a nude body part that did not belong on Facebook. And the next day I received a notification that it did not go against community standards. It was nudity, it was literal nudity. So if that doesn't go against community standards, I had to ask myself, like, what does? Next, acting with transparency when a breach does occur. The content restriction issue described with TikTok is an example of an error occurring and the company taking accountability and corrective action. Next, offering mental health resources and partnering with mental health organizations. So Facebook is an example of an organization who has done this by partnering with some organizations that support mental health. Also, of course, reducing exposure to harmful content can occur both legislatively and, of course, at home. Some final thoughts. Much of Australia and New South Wales have enacted phone-free school policies. New South Wales enacted phone-free schools in 2024. In a survey, 87% of students were less distracted in the classroom, and 81% of students had seen improved learning, according to almost 1,000 principals who were surveyed. In South Australia, there had been 63% decline in critical incidents involving social media and 54% fewer behavioral issues. So what have we learned? We've learned what data is collected from social media sites, what the data is used for, where some of it is stored. We've learned what algorithms are, how they can provide both helpful and harmful experiences to users' mental health. Past and current regulatory initiatives were discussed, as well as some steps in social media companies can and have taken to mitigate the negative mental health effects on their platforms, and initiatives that Australia and New South Wales have taken for phone-free schools. So there was this overarching theme of ethics throughout the presentation this evening. One opinion I will express is that maybe we shouldn't wait, maybe we shouldn't hold our breath for social media companies to become an ethical beacon. And our voices are powerful where they're consumers. So we can take collective action with our own social media use. And it's okay to confront that as being challenging, because I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room who could stand to use social media a little bit less. These are my references. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thank you very much. I'm going to hand it back to our moderator, Dr.
Right.
Glynn.
Yep. All right, so you should, I better fix this. This is a little dark. It got dark while we were here. Oh, well. That's the way it is. Anyway, let me put this up for my view, and let me say that I don't know about others, but I learned an enormous amount from this particular panel this evening. Things that that in my mind actually turned out to be myths, and some things that I knew nothing about. And I don't know, Asme, do you have anything in the chat, because it is time for the Q&A?
Nothing was posted in the chat.
Okay, so then what I have, which is unfortunate because there I'm sure there are good questions, but I do have a couple of questions. And I think we should also allow our panelists to ask questions of each other, if that's the case. So my first question is, it actually is for Sandra Harris. And that I think what was very interesting to me was the whole idea about the digital gap. And, how do you talked about how we really potentially have created a situation where you have some who really don't have access or may not know how to use it, et cetera. And you start to get this gap that is there that could be very harmful. So did you have any suggestions or have you come across strategies for bridging that gap that have been effective or that we could think about?
Well, yes, and it's certainly something that we have been concerned about since the very beginning. Our coalition started in 2019, and before COVID, when we did notice the impact of loneliness and social isolation on older adults in Massachusetts. And then came COVID, and I think one of the real crises that we had during COVID was the fact that when they rolled out the vaccine um, registration process, it was all digitally based, right, for older adults who were not on social media. They did not have the devices and the Wi-Fi necessary to register. So it certainly was a dismal failure. One of the things that we have begun to do is introduce digital training, digital literacy programs in our councils on aging and senior centers. We have a lot of intergenerational programs where young people are working with older adults in their neighborhoods to share with them or work with them on digital literacy. Lots of things are going on in colleges and universities as well. And one of the initiative of the coalition was to create a collaborative that has really spun off and is now part of the, I guess, this Department of Aging Secretary in her office, where it's really beginning to expand. So, and I know in Massachusetts, there's lots of efforts that are being made to address the digital divide, and even providing Wi-Fi and other kinds of services in areas, especially rural areas, where, we have a lot of disconnections. So I think there are lots of things are going on. A lot of things are happening in communities. Throughout the US. But at the same time, we do find that there are some people who are just not interested, right? And those are the ones that we're really concerned about, because if they're not interested, there's really nothing that you can do. But when you think about it, we see that everything requires having online access, right? Checking Social Security, right? Checking on Medicare and Medicaid. So think about these people who are not connected. And I think that we're going to leave a lot of people behind.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Kathy Fuller raised a question about phone usage in schools. I don't know who would like to handle that. I don't know, Paul. She asked, let me just raise the question up in my chat here. Do you know whether schools in the US who have gone phone free during the school day are doing research related to student engagement in the classroom and collecting assessment results?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I mean, that so many schools are currently enacting these bans, and this is a wonderful natural experiment, right? And Professor Hawk did share with us some data that has been collected on the effectiveness of school bans already, but but who is monitoring the sort of effects? And I think the short answer is not many. Unfortunately, an organization that I represent, a nonprofit called Children and Screens, we're trying to partner with some other organizations to put these studies in place so we can figure out how did they work, what were the effects. Unfortunately, it's a tough time to get to get these kind of studies funded.
Yeah.
But I would be interested in if Professor Hawk has any further insights. You did share some data on the Australia ban, I think.
Yes, so that's the only place that I pulled the data from was Australia and New South Wales. So I do not have any data on American schools either. But I wondered the same thing. That's really interesting that you have a nonprofit that's dedicated towards that.
You
Some
know
of
what was
this,
interesting when I was preparing for this panel in terms of, just going to the literature to help direct what we were going to cover, et cetera. What was really interesting to me is that so much of the literature and research that has been done on an international level. And it was just interesting to me that it was only like within the last 5 years that it seemed that the US really started producing research related to social media use. Um, I see Paul saying, yes, maybe that is true, but it is an interesting fact that I found anyway. Um, Let's see. Well, it's not a fact. I take that back. It's not a fact. It's just something that I noted.
and I
It
just
looks,
wanted to add
yeah,
about the school bans is that most of the bans in the United States are pretty recent. They started in 2014, and the school systems do have the intent to evaluate how they're working. I know Minnesota, for example, they have a whole plan about how they're going to evaluate it, but they just haven't had time yet.
thank you. And you know what? I was just thinking this might be a good DNP project for some of our students. And Sharon, do you want to ask your question?
Of course. So, what a great talk. I appreciate this knowledge, especially where I have a 10-year-old at home who is very much into, YouTube and some of those other platforms, obviously not Facebook or TikTok, but I know those YouTube shorts are like his best friend. And I think, unfortunately, has caused some challenges with attention span. And so I was hoping maybe you could comment a little bit on the impact that social media is having on children's attention spans, because I do think it is having an impact. I see the impact, in my own child. But one of the other comments I just wanted to make is now with these watches, like Apple watches that also have that technology piece to it, I don't know if those are being banned in schools, because that's just another area where kids still have access to, obviously texting and even social media within their watches as well. So I don't know if schools have gone that far to ban the watches, but just a comment I thought I'd share there. But I guess more so the question regarding attention and the result of social media with that piece.
Yeah, Sharon, some great points there. And you bring up an important point that a school phone ban is not a school phone ban, right? The devil is in the details, and how they're going about banning the phones is so different. And some do specifically ban these watches, and some do not. For example, some would allow use, in between classes, and some do not, for example. So there's a lot of particulars there that have to be observed. Now, your comment that that the that sort of screen media, and especially that which changes rapidly, seems to affect our attention span, I think is an excellent observation. I had a 10-year-old tell me the other day. She says, I only watch YouTube shorts because YouTube is way too boring for me. She finds that to be able to watch a 10-minute video is just beyond her. But the truth is, I'd be interested in Dr. Vidal's take. My sense is that we just don't have good good research. That research has not really proven this point that we all seem like I feel like most people I know would say that their attention span has decreased. How often do we read books now compared to how we did 15, 20 years ago? But as far as I can tell, research has not proven this point. But I'm interested if Dr. Vidal knows or what your take is.
Yeah, I think the research has not proven this point. I think we can like maybe, so there's like a sense of that there's not a definition of what really we're looking into. Is it distraction? Is it like ability to stay focused for a long time? There's like um, different dimensions that people are trying to study, and there's not enough data yet. But we do know from previous data that, for example, kids with more use of screens, the idea is that they have a higher threshold for like for stimuli. So when you have ADHD, for example, you need to have a lot of stimuli to get your attention, basically. And when you're exposed to high stimuli environment all the time, your threshold goes up. So it means that like lower stimuli are not as powerful and that they don't catch your attention in a way or another. So if someone is exposed to screens and a lot of lights and a lot of noise all the time from a very young age, they'll have a lot of like a harder time focusing on math because it's boring. Like they don't get this motivation to be, they don't get this stimulation as much. So there's some theory from what we know from before social media that maybe too much screen time is not so great because of that reason for focusing. Yeah, but we don't really have research yet on social media or like on, it's my guess is that yes, it probably doesn't help. And I work in schools and I've seen classes with kids without phones and it's a complete different world. Like they're so engaged. They're like completely focused. They listen to you. Whereas if you go to classes with kids with phones, it's a very different thing. So I think that we don't have enough data, but you could tell from what the teachers are saying that there's probably an issue and that, yeah. And I think that, look, what Paul was saying too, is that the bans vary a lot from school to school. So it's really hard, but most of them don't really target watches. So I think that's a challenge. Also, we are banning the phones, but a lot of the schools are now working with computers, laptops, and they also allow access to apps and things like that. So that's another issue too.
Thank you, Dr. Vidal. Let me just move this here. Do we have anything else in the chat room, Esme?
It looks like some comments, but no questions.
Okay.
I do have a question of Paul.
Oh, good.
Paul, I was at a conference probably about a year and a half ago, where we were kind of really talking about smartphones and the smartphone generation. And I guess it was for the first time that I heard or acknowledged at least that you begin to see the loneliness and depression before smartphones. So smartphones did not help the situation, but there's evidence to believe that it does not cause the situation. One of the thoughts or suggestions was, and the presenter was careful to say, I'm not saying that this is the reason, but the fact that perhaps she almost introduced the idea of maybe it's helicopter parenting, and that young people just they were not able to develop that muscle, right? That caused people to kind of be on their own. I mean, think about it. When we were young, we went out and we played, right? We fought our own fights. We found our own friends. We made our own schedules, right? So one thought was, she said, I'm not saying that it's the cause, but I'm just suggesting and wondering, if the young people, if that muscle is not being developed, how have you heard that argument, or what's your thoughts, feeling about that?
Yeah, well, one thing I've learned as a child psychiatrist is that kids are so different, right? That we do see common themes, but every family is different, and understanding the nuances in the relationship between the parents and kids is often so different. And you're right that, and I believe that's another point of the anxious generation that was brought up in Dr. Haidt's book, is that sort of is that kids need more freedom, right? However, and I certainly I've seen, kids who really couldn't, look sideways without their parent, commenting, for sure. But studies seem to don't necessarily bear out that in general that is a that sort of closeness and parental interaction actually is protective for mental health in general, speaking in general terms, right? The more time that parents are with kids in general, the better their mental health, rather than the worse. So I do think kids are very different, and so many of the kids that I see are not, I mean, the parents, they may have to work, or very often they're doing their own screen media activities or social media, and the kids are really left to their own devices literally for most the great majority of the day. And so that, in my practice, tends to be more of a concern than overbearing parents, although you're absolutely right that it can be an issue as well. But interested in Dr. Vidal, you see a lot of families as well.
And I don't know if my families are different from your families. I see a lot of families in the inner city in Baltimore, and I get the two the two sides. Like, some of the kids are really on their own and figuring things out on their own. Other families are not allowing them to go out because there's community violence, and then there's like other families that are on top of them with a lot of structured time and not a lot of space for like self-development or self-exploration. So I think I see the whole gamut. I do think it's interesting, all the like public debate that's going on. I know Jonathan Haidt talks about this, a little bit about the anxious generation, and just sort of like focuses on social media. And then there's like Abigail Shrier, who talks about this like overbearing parenting and not letting kids be themselves, because there's been less, families are smaller, so there's more focus on each one of the kids. And maybe we do work a lot, but also we have maybe more time than at other times in human history, where we were working like basically all the time, right? So I think there's different opinions about it. I think it depends sometimes on social class. I do think some families that are of more means have more time for their kids, whereas others have less time. But I agree with Sandra in the sense that I do think kids need time on their own to develop themselves, and not being monitored a little bit. Sometimes it's a good thing, just so that you can, explore your peer relationships, especially when you become a teenager. Like, you have to have some way of exploration on your own.
I have a question, and this is, it kind of goes to where you were saying, I think, Paul, you were talking about the definition of social media, what really is it, right? And my granddaughter, I mean, this is in the last, well, she's now in 7th grade. She did get a phone this year, but she had an iPad before that. And so many of the young children are playing all these games on their iPads, like Roblox, and they're giving gift certificates at birthday parties for using Roblox. And, that has many good attributes in my mind, in that you can play games and be creative and do all that, but they're communicating back and forth with each other, you know, in those games. And what are your thoughts on that, and how that is anything being done on research related to that?
Yeah. So you bring a great point. So if they're chatting on while they're playing Roblox, right?
Right.
Is that social media? It kind of is, and it kind of isn't. Or if they're playing Call of Duty and they're talking on Discord, is that social media? Well, yes and no. So this is one of the challenges that we have in studying, social media, because just like my point with the YouTube, social media has kind of bled into so many other domains that it does become difficult to parse out, what is what. And research on even a specific platform like Instagram from 10 years ago, how do we apply that now when Instagram is such a different platform than it was? So it just goes to show this is the difficulties that researchers face. But I will share one thing that I thought was very interesting is that looking at during the pandemic, of course, kids couldn't get together, and their screen media use skyrocketed as we
Right.
would guess, of course. But what I thought was that it was going to be everything: solo video games, YouTube. But it wasn't. The by and large, watching videos was roughly flat. It was social media and online or social video games that really skyrocketed, almost like the kids were replacing their time together with time
Right.
online. That other types of solo activities on screen media did not increase nearly as much. So I mean that's a great point. I wish I had a better answer for you,
No,
but
that's good. That helps.
good.
Um, here's Jessica Gallo. Are you seeing new concerns unfolding? Wait, it went away. I gotta get my.
Unfolding with new development with AI, photos are realistically scary now. Um, and yeah, I think that this is another great question. It's the new frontier. I think we have very little information on it. Um, Certainly there's a couple different things. I mean, AI is being used to treat mental health conditions. AI therapists. And there have been some concerns where some of them have gone terribly wrong that you might have read about, but also AI relationships. And I have not seen a lot of engagement with my patients with AI chatbots, but I saw one girl who was autistic and developed a relationship with character AI. It was some character from a manga, and they had a romantic relationship, and she was like 12 or so, and this she became so attached to this AI boyfriend that it became a daily constant battle that ended when the parents took away, her access and she attempted suicide. So in some cases, it can really take over kids' lives. But I think that we really just don't know the impact and what it's going to be. It's so new.
Yeah. I have one more question. And I'm trying to think if it was, no, I lost my train of thought and I didn't write it down.
I have a question for Professor Hawk, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, so you talked about the ways that social media companies can make their platforms healthier. If you had a magic wand and you could sort of enforce 3 changes that social media platforms would make in order to make them more friendly for mental health of kids and teens, what would they be?
Oh man. Okay, okay. I mean, one really has to do with better content moderation. I know I said that, but that one is truly it's just it's disturbing what some, kiddos are able to access on there. Um, it would it be okay to put like a mandatory netiquette kind of course before I think my biggest wish with a magic wand is that we all recognize the need to have the same demeanor and manners online as we do in person. Um, I just wish that there was some kind of way to enforce that. Can that be two?
Absolutely. I think in South Korea they teach internet etiquette universally starting in kindergarten. So I do think it is
Really?
possible for sure.
oh, and that was my question, only you articulated it a lot better, but that was exactly what I was thinking. And my other question was, it could AI really be used if companies were willing to spend money on it or whatever? Could it really be used to monitor the content and delete it?
I think so. I think it could certainly flag content. It could flag what I saw It could, yeah. There's no reason that that should be there, and then there's no reason that it should be kicked back and not removed. These companies make so much money. If they can afford $24 million in lobbying last year, then they can
Yeah,
afford
right.
content moderation that works.
Yeah,
Right.
and with Dr. Vidal's study, you know, she found how easy it was for her to find suicide content. She found it in moments, and it's my belief that the companies are very invested in looking like they're trying to make their platforms healthier. Are they really invested in making their platforms healthier? I maybe I'm pessimistic, but I don't think they are.
Right.
TikTok actually, they've been publicly saying that they've been doing things and they've listed them. So it seems like since last year they're trying a little harder. But the machine, they have people looking at the content, but they do have machines already looking at content. But I don't think they're fast enough for the because the kids are very creative about creating new words, and that's really hard. It just there's a gap of time there. There's a lot, that they just keep posting information on the on suicide before it's caught. I do have a question for all of the panelists, and because I'm interested in it personally. So, for Megan, for Dr. Hawk, and also for Paul and Sandra specifically with older people too. I'm not sure. Like, I know that like with social media, there's a lot of political division, and I know that content that's very extreme tends to be more attractive to people. So I don't know if the algorithm that Dr. Hogg was talking about, if with the political division, it's something that's driven by the company, or is it driven by the consumer? And that's why we have so much division. And I'm also concerned about like older people that maybe are not going out as much and they're getting all the information on social media, just as much as with younger people, but specifically older people may not be like talking to other people in person or something, and they're just getting that information on social media. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I would agree that older adults compared to youngers tend to be more socially isolated, especially after retirement, especially after they can no longer drive and get from one place to another. So I think that those who are engaging in social media tend to spend more time there and get most of their information. And I think that therefore they, in a way, depend more on social media and smartphones for contact, especially when they're not near family and loved ones.
Megan, did you want to say anything regards this? Or Paul? I think you're.
Um,
I
I think it's a combination of both. Just going back to the original point where you asked if it was user driven or company driven. I honestly think it's both. I think that, say somebody just starts out on Facebook for the very first time and they like, they like a post about, I don't know, feeding hungry people, and then all of a sudden it's just flooded with, um, left-leaning type stuff. I one time I created a fake profile on Facebook and I experimented with it, and that flood did occur. I don't want to say the second I liked, something that would have leaned one way or the other, but it did not take long for lots of different content of the same brand started showing up. But yeah, I definitely don't think that the social media companies help, and I think that they have um, way more control over those algorithms than they probably want to take credit for.
So we've got about 5 more minutes left before we really need to do the evaluation, but I just wanted to know if there's any one of the panelists that has a summary statement they'd like to make about the topic in general. I mean, you don't have to.
I don't have a summary statement, but I have a magic wand question for the other panelists. Paul, I noticed in your conversation with interest that you specifically talked about age groups 18 to 23, right? and the loneliness. And we also know that that falls, if I'm calculating things right, within Gen Z. And research now shows that Gen Z is the most lonely
Hi,
generation,
Esme.
right? Lonely, and
Mm.
most people don't know that, but they're more lonely, depressed than older adults. So we're really trying to finding that we're having to really spend more time looking at solving for loneliness within that generation. So how do we do that? Using your magic wand, how do we begin to address loneliness among the very young, 18 to 23?
Yeah, so and most of my patients are teens and adolescents, and so I focus most of my efforts on kids that age, and I do think that and there's concerning research that it seems like, those who grew up with, greater technology access early in their lives are more susceptible to depression, and that may be why we're seeing, we haven't seen big increases. It's an adolescent mental health crisis, not an adult mental health crisis. Although young adults are, struggling to a lesser degree as well. And so for me, a lot of my work focuses on trying to figure out ways to engage kids with each other, in person, doing a variety of healthy activities, hobbies, from work to family activities to sports or art, and after school, activities, that kind of thing. Because unfortunately, kids have a harder time finding it by wandering out their door and wandering into the kids on the street, because there are no kids on the street. And I get your point about kids needing to have autonomy, right? And being able to have self-determination and be able to learn from their lessons. Unfortunately, it's a harder world to do that. It's a lonelier world to do that for kids. So for me, I really focus on engaging kids in a number of different things. And then the video games and the social media just aren't that important to them, is what I find. That when I'm successful at doing that, they don't desperately need to be checking, so often.
I think that's it for this evening. I don't see anything other questions. There were good comments in there. And I appreciate the panelists' times. You all were amazing. And it was very kind of you to stay this long and answer all these questions. And I think it was fun to have the dialogue amongst the four of you as well. So I'm now going to, that's it for, oh, you're getting things in here that says this was really great. I learned a lot. So you might want to look at the chat a minute before you sign off. And I am going to put the link to the evaluation tool up in the chat now. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks again to Harvard Pilgrim Health, who really makes these possible. They sustain us in many ways. So thank them as well.